Hello, fellow leaders. My name is Prasad Vadlamani, and I'm your host of the Indian Leadership Podcast. I'm delighted to welcome you to a thought provoking leadership talk with Shankar Kalyana, who grew up in India watching Hollywood matinee idols, wanted to study astrophysics, but ended up at a job as a computer programmer. He felt and still feels that computer programming is a universal language that everyone can understand. He chose to come to the USA because it's this country where technologies are either invented or matured. He spoke fondly about his mentors who patiently taught him introductory lessons to computers, the bootcamp style education he received at his first job, and about his early days in the US, how both fellow Indian and American communities embraced him where he learned to adjust to a new culture and country. Shankar is a technical genius who has keen business insights. Don't miss this talk as he speaks a lot about mentorship, inspiring teams through your behavior, and leading by example. Enjoy the show. So, from a career point of view, you did spend a lot of your experience in information technology one way or the other, right? You probably built the building blocks of technology since then, right? So how would you define your career? Is it more linear or is it more something you define as you go?
I don't think it's been linear in that sense. Yes, at a macro level, it's probably linear, right? That's been, you can say that, I was a programmer. I started off as a hardcore programmer that is now an architect at the highest degree, right, in complex systems and so on. So in that sense, I've kind of gone through progression, if you want to put it that way. But I think I have really done pretty much a tremendous number of roles across the IT space, right, and learned a lot across the way, right. So I've been a developer, I've been in the application side, I've been on the I've learned a bit of infrastructure and in operations areas. I'm systems management. I have delved into both the data side and the application side. I've been sometimes I've had to man help desk. There are cases where we in one specific engagement, I was the team lead, I was the lead architect, I was the man on the help desk, right, once the system went live and fixing code and in production. And so you just play the roles that you play, right? So what fascinated me was the problem solving, right? To me, it was a lot of these were problems to solve, and the satisfaction that you get out of attempting to solve the problem and then going through a methodical way to get to them, right? So in that sense, I didn't really care about which roles are played and whatnot. So to me, the journey was more important than the milestone, so to speak, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Even the big companies that we see from the outside, they might look monolithic, but inside those, there are a lot of teams that are scrappy in nature. Yeah. They want to solve the problem no matter what. They're not waiting for somebody else to give them directions or permission to do it. They just want to do it.
Yeah. And the people, it's interesting. I was recently, one of my, somebody told me, if you think that there is 3 people sitting in a back room, working on this problem and solving it for you, right? We were actually talking to somebody else about it, right? It's not like that. There's no smart people out there. We are the smart people, right? So it's not like there is like this 3 smart people out there you can just go rely on and say they're going to solve everything for you, right? So in a sense, what taught me was expertise itself is relative, right? There's no absolute sense of expertise, right? Context, brings out, what is really purposeful at the time and what is needed at the time, and the team or the individuals that rise up to the occasion really happen to be the experts for the moment, right? Yeah. So in a sense, it's not to say we shouldn't, we are not devaluing expertise. Of course, knowledge and expertise and skills go a long way, but there's no absolutes in there, right? So I think, if you don't apply it to the context, it is not going to help you, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's not, you don't wait for perfection. You keep doing and you learn on the way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I see that, there are a lot of inflection points whether from a technology point of view, and then you said moving on from being a developer to an architect and taking on bigger leadership roles. What made you think of wanting to take that kind of roles? Because how did you approach that?
Yeah, I think the developer to architect one was easy, right? I mean, I mentioned the
Yes.
conversation I had with this consultant mentor, right? And I think it is just the fact that in a sense, when you put problem solving in there, what you're really talking about is it's less about the role and more about the scope of the system, right? So the scope, as the scope of the system increased, right, the more complex the systems became, the more complex the number of technologies that you had to work with, etc., became. The role of architect itself kind of became a bigger deal for me, right? So I started off as an application architect that then had to get into data architecture, then integration architecture. Then I was an enterprise architect in a bunch of dimensions. Then I figured out that holy shit, man, I am there are things I don't know about the space when it comes to infrastructure and operations and security and so on. So I actually made it a point to learn some of those things. So in a sense, I became kind of well versed in dimensions of the problems. And then the more I knew about this, the more it became I was able to contribute more to other kinds of systems, right? So it became like that. And to some extent, I mean, my success in the cloud space, I think came about because of the fact that I had played in a lot of these different areas in the initial part of the first 20, 25 years that actually helped me in good stead, right? Because, not to change topics, but cloud forces you to kind of think systems, right? As much as it is about the fact that, okay, yeah, it's about consuming a resource somewhere, ultimately still building a system. Now your system is distributed like crazy. You got to figure out all these different dimensions. Nobody's out there protecting you, right? You got to build the system yourself, right?
Yeah.
The components are provided, but you have to architect the system, which means, the responsibility to build something that's functionally and non-functionally, rigorous is on you, right? So I think, a lot of these initial learnings, helped, when we came to the cloud era, right? So, yeah.
Sure. And, within IBM, right, like, getting that coveted, that IBM fellow, right, is it's an honor. I mean, a lot of people, wear that badge with honor, right? Tell us about that, the journey. Like, is that something that you wanted it, or, did you work towards it, or is it just that you kept building and you got it?
Yeah. No, I think it's probably both, right? So I would say I didn't know this, but I essentially grew up in an IBM culture, right? Back in the initial days, and I did go out and work for other kinds of firms and learned a lot and picked up a lot of good things from many other places. But when I did come back to IBM, one of the things that struck me was the importance and the formalism and the professionalism IBM paid to technical careers, right? So I had not experienced that level of formalism in any other place I'd been in until the time, right? Now, yeah, obviously a lot of other companies also follow the IBM model, but back in the I would say the even the 80s and 90s, it was not something that many other companies are doing, right? I mean, IBM kind of perfected this professional model of technical communities and technical professions and so on. So architect was a well-ordained profession in the IBM community, and you had a well-defined career path, right? I mean, as in, you become certified, you get senior certification, then if you're lucky, you get to be distinguished engineer, and if you're real lucky, and you get to be IBM fellow, right? I mean, you had a well-defined career path, so it was kind of in front of us, right? But we all knew that you're talking 400,000 person company at any given time, right? We have hovered between 300 to 400,000, and in the community of people, if you say about 200,000 are about the technical community, people who are in the technical professions, you have about 500 to 700 distinguished engineers, right? And you have about, somewhere now we have about 100 fellows, right? In the entire history of IBM, only 250 people or 300 have made IBM fellow, right?
Yeah.
So we knew that it's an achievable objective, but it's an extraordinarily difficult objective, right? So it's one of those things. So it's there in the back of your mind. So, but there is no, I mean, we still go through these kinds of things in IBM too, right? It's not a bunch of checkboxes that you accomplish these 8 things, you make it, right? So it's always a combination of tangible and intangible things. And sometimes luck has to meet opportunity, right? That intersection has to happen. So I would say I would say it's not planned that way, but definitely it was in my vision, right? To say that I'm never satisfied with some of these things in terms of where I'm looking for always the next big thing to do in terms of making an impact and learning something new. So that automatically leads you to new spaces, that gets you newer exposures, newer experiences that just happen to matter, right? So
of course. And is it more of a research aspect or that gets you there? Is it more of an impact that gets you there?
it is impact. Yeah, I would say it is impact. I think again, it's in because I am in the IBM services part of the house. Obviously IBM research. The way the fellows in IBM research or IBM systems or IBM software have a slightly different profile than say people IBM fellows from services, right? I mean, but with that said, each of us has you can trace the lineage of impact back to in different ways to both our clients and our communities and IBM as a result, right? So yeah, that's probably the common thread. But the profile would be, each of us is actually, crazily unique in that regard, right? It's very, very difficult to find two people of the exact same ilk, right?
Yeah.
But with that said, yeah, the commonality is really the impact, right? So yeah.
The immigrant experience, right? Do you think that helped towards in the leadership growth, or is it?
I actually say, yeah. I mean, it's very difficult to say this without walking someone else's shoes, right?
Yeah.
But I can tell you, and this is where I'm going to be a bit more, I guess, bolder in talking about, experiences I probably haven't lived. I'm going to say, number one, yes, absolutely. For me, I don't think I could have drawn my career and my life any other way without having gone through the experiences I did, right? So, yeah. I mean, there's literally no other way to say, what life would have been, right? If I not made certain choices, either willingly or unwillingly, right? Whenever I did them, right? And the other way to think about this is, I think being an immigrant, the one thing that, yes, I mean, it was a good experience for me, but you really had to work harder, right? In a sense, because you were in a new culture, new environment, new place, you had new people to impress, right? So on and so forth. So you did work harder, right? I mean, so in a sense that, maybe that was something that did help, right? I would say. I think I experienced the global, worldview that I had coming from India, and being an immigrant in this country. And by the way, my job took me to places, right? Within the US as well as outside the US. So the more you travel, the more well-rounded you became. Because, in a sense, the biggest thing I'm going to lay at the feet of this is the well-rounded experience as an immigrant compared to, say, somebody that really hasn't had those experiences of living in another culture, experiencing other kinds of cultures or teams or people like that. I think that definitely did that, right? I would not discount that at all, right? So I think I found my voice more, persuasively, as an immigrant, because of that, right? In some ways.
Sure.
I think, I go back to this stuff. I mean, I didn't write this phrase, but I read this somewhere and I thought it was really well said. I mean, the immigrant experience is coming into a melting pot, right? I mean, it's a melting pot of different cultures and different people and so on. And to experience that culture effectively, somebody said, yes, it's a melting pot, but you have to melt a little, right? To be part of the melting pot, which means, there are some things you have to adapt, right? You can't lose your identity, but you can't necessarily be isolated either, right? So, so you got to find a way to get the balance true. And I think that's very critical. In a sense, that I'm going to say that is another aspect of it that really, I would say helped in me growing as an individual and as a leader, right? Because the adaptability, the collaboration, the embrace of different cultures and perspectives and opinions, right? It just was natural, right? I mean, you had to do those things. If you didn't do this, you're just in an isolated way, right? So
yeah. And if you have that isolated way, it's hard to grow into leadership or anything like also because we're going to pivot a little bit into family, raising kids, in US, right? So please tell us about your family.
I would say growing up, it was like the way I talked about it, right? I mean, I had, sibling, I have three brothers, three brothers and one sister. A big family, but normal for the times I grew up in India, I would say.
Yeah.
And each well accomplished in their own way, and it's all. So I would say the power of education to some extent, really, you can trace a lineage back. I mean, that's something that really helped, right? In terms of believing in that value of education. I'm saying not in terms of getting a degree, right? I would say really learning, right? And investing in growing, right? That is probably more important. But I am happily married with to my wife Jaya and my daughter Nikita, who is actually fifth year at University of Texas in Austin. I'm not necessarily sure life suddenly changes dramatically in terms of a family, right? Raising it, your parent being a parent, your responsibilities and accountabilities as a parent, the toils that you got to put through, and as well as just watching your children grow and learning life through them. I don't know if that actually changes because you are in India versus US or elsewhere, right? I mean, that's one of the things that, to my earlier point about, there's so much common in humanity, right? I mean, it's the same experiences. Parents are the same everywhere. They go through the same kinds of, what the only thing that separates parents everywhere is the economics, right? I mean, if you are wealthier, you get certain access to certain things that you probably can't, otherwise, right?
Sure.
So if you're a wealthy parent in India versus a wealthy parent in the United States, I'm not sure life is that different, as a parent between those two things, right?
Right.
Of course, there are certain cultural aspects, right? When it comes to, practice of, your cultural practices, your food, and those things are always there. But I'm saying, as a parenting job, I'm not sure it's necessarily that different. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
At least that's my experience, right? I think it's the same, very similar, right? So yeah.
Were you hands-on, like in upbringing, like for either?
Not as much as I should have been, because my wife did, because I was traveling quite a bit for my job. I think my wife did an admirable job, and I will, a lot to, I could trace it back to things that did well for my daughter. Probably my wife had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, of course, I did have a part to play, but not as much as I probably should have, given I was literally not physically here for a lot of time, right? So
okay.
Yeah.
So do you still have any strong bond with India and family and friends in India when you grow up? Do you maintain that bonding?
I wouldn't say as much on the friend side, right? I mean, I think it's one of those things that you kind of, chart your own. I mean, I have occasional contacts with people, that I grew up with, right? In fact, I found my childhood friend, who, he and I were very, very close. I eventually hooked up with him, almost 40, 50 years later, right? And he's in Florida, right? So we finally connected, etc., like that. So I do have, my circle, to my earlier point about being an introvert in some ways, I have few friends that are very tight, right? As opposed to, having, hundreds of people that I'm just having acquaintances with, right? So I'm probably more like that. And they are both within India as well as here, right? So it's kind of like that. So
yeah, I mean, with WhatsApp and Facebook, I was able to resurface a lot of friends from back then. Actually, resurface, and I was able to maintain a little bit in the friend circle also in recent times. I haven't spoken to them in 20 years, and then all of a sudden, you talk to them, it feels like there's not much difference, right?
Yeah,
so it helped a little bit. Yeah,
I don't know if you watched the show Home Improvement. I think. That's I remember an episode from there where it's this guy is like in his 40s and his buddy from childhood shows up or something like that, and they want to relive the experience as they were like 20 years ago, and they find that it doesn't work, right? Because they're just in two different places now, right? I mean, they have kids who are teenagers and two different families, et cetera, all that. So it's really difficult to recreate any of those things. I think we got to recognize that those friendships matter, and they have a certain place in life for you, and as you grow they also grow, right? And it's a different relationship, right, as things grow.
What about your kid and having strong relationship with her cousins? Is that strong? Do you?
Yeah, I would say she probably does a better job of it than I do, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, she's got, they, Lord knows what they communicate on, but yeah, they are all on Instagram, and she's got relationships with the nieces and nephews and others, right? Yeah. So
yeah. When I'm talking to different leaders, right? People who grew up 30, 40 years ago, people who grew up 20 years ago, and the kids growing up now, in some ways, their experiences seem to be getting better, right? But probably a little bit more stressful because of all this, social media and kind of things. But kind of feel like from immigrant point of view, they feel more accepted, or they're more defined, right? Rather than people who grew up here 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think, I don't want to make all about that, but we used to have that moniker ABCD back then, right?
Yeah.
I think the C needs to be thrown away, right?
Yeah.
They're not. They are very, very sure of what they are right now.
But if you actually think about it, it's the same. I mean, you can trace that to every immigrant community that has come into this country. It's the same, very similar, right? I mean, the first generation, they always struggle. They have to work harder because they have to establish the roots, right?
Yeah.
And then the second generation is a bit more confident and assertive, and third generation is like, you can't even tell, right? I mean, it's like that, right? So I think it is true of pretty much a lot of these cultures. So I think, as first generation immigrants, we were all probably a bit more of the C, as you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the same as obviously, our children are very different, right? Yeah. So
do you have any advice to the upcoming leaders who are getting started now, and any leaders who are already, mid-level leaders who are trying to take on big roles? Like, do you have any advice targeting them?
Anybody that tells you that leadership is a natural thing and you can't acquire it, I think they're just a bunch of BS, right? Because like I said, I mean, I go back to I don't think anybody who saw me when I was like 8 years old or 15 years old or 20 years old would imagine me as a leader in the way that I've been, right? So I think a lot of this is acquired, and you can acquire it, right? But number two, I'm not necessarily sure that you have to imagine yourself being a leader, right? I mean, I think part of this growth of a leader is to imagine yourself in situations and visualize success, right? Visualize, kind of impact that you want to make, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, it's not like learning, it's not a book level thing, right? It's experiential, which means, why do people respect you and follow you? Because leadership's about inspiring people. It's about people following you. You got to take them, lead them to a place where they're all collectively believing in that purpose, and so on and so forth. Which means that, there are characteristics that you imbibe, that you have to imbibe. Some are natural and some are acquired, right? Whether it's around knowledge base, right? I mean, you got to be really good at the content space that you're in, right? You got to be really good at collaborating with them and trusting their judgment, when they're good. You need to know, your strengths and weaknesses, and know how to build the team together where the strengths, accentuate and they complement the weaknesses, right? In some way. So I think there are things that you got to learn how to, do these things, because it's usually, leadership is about making the team work, right? If it were just one person doing everything, then, we don't need people, right? It's like that. Yeah. So a lot of this is about recognizing this and visualizing what it takes to, be there. So my counsel is, I think it is, and you got to have the aptitude, and you have to have the attitude, right? You got to have both. Some people are okay, not necessarily doing that, and that's okay. Ultimately, it's about being comfortable with yourself, right? Sure. So don't aspire to do something. When I say don't aspire, I'm saying if you have certain innate weaknesses that prevent you from doing certain things, don't go crazy at it, right? That's one thing. On the other hand, don't live in your comfort zone forever, right? Because, being in a comfort zone is only going to get you'll never grow, right? So it's about knowing what is the stretch zone versus what's a danger zone, right? So you got to keep stretching, but don't get into dangerous places where you can't come back from, right? So, yeah.
What is one action that you want our listeners to do as their first step towards leadership?
To me, it's about, you got to know yourself. I think it's about, really embracing. You got to first figure out what your passion is. You got to figure out whether leading is really a passion for you, right? I mean, you can't aspire to be this and take on leadership roles if that's not, your comfort zone, right? On the other hand, if you aspire to it, but you don't have the skills to be able to do it, that's what I meant by the stretch zone, right? I think you need to figure out how to stretch into those kinds of areas. But passion is what got to drive it. And then, don't give up on it just because you think you don't have passion. Sometimes you have to try it, right? Yeah. When you try it and you fail, you may find that you actually liked it and you just have to improve on it, right? So to me, it's about, figure yourself out and what you want to be, and then go do it, right? I mean, sometimes we overthink a lot of these things. Sometimes it's just about doing and living, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you said multiple times, leadership is about inspiring people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at times you could have the right intentions, but you fail to inspire. Maybe not everybody, to a few people. You can't inspire them. You fail to do that. You're not able to connect. So how do you fix that?
Well, my simple philosophy is there's 20% on the right hand edge who don't need motivation at all. They are self-motivated, right? And then you have 20% on the left hand edge of the curve, and to your point about inspiring. I mean, some people in some situations contextually for that moment are not the right people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, and what you do is you have to focus on the first 20 and the middle 60, right? So use the first 20 to drive the middle 60, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you put your energies on. And sometimes that may inspire the other 20 and other times it's not, and it's okay, right? Yeah. What matters is the outcome in some of these cases. And you can't beat yourself up because people you couldn't do this good enough or somebody didn't, because it's about context. Sometimes it's not about the individual. I mean, they were probably the right individual for other things and they're just the wrong individual for this. Other times you're not good enough for that specific activity and you may not have related and communicated with them, right? So I think those are okay. I mean, the key is that are you able to affect and drive home the other 20 and 60% that I talked about. If you're doing that, then you're okay, right? If you can't do that at all, then maybe you have to question, where you are going wrong in terms of, what are you doing in your style, in your knowledge base, and you got to have an open, honest conversation with some of these people to give you some coaching on what could you have done better, right? I mean, so that's part of that, right? So
sure. So now we're entering a fun zone, right? Question is, if you can say anything and place a billboard anywhere in the world, right? What does it say and where do you want that billboard be placed?
The one thing that I've actually learned, to a lot of the experiences that come this way is the power of humanity, right? I think I'm a global citizen, right? I mean, just by the heart of it. So I'm not into, to me, it's about everyone's got something to contribute. Everyone's unique, everyone's, got goods and bad, right? I mean, just the way it is. I mean, to me, that's the way I look at it. I'm not necessarily into the divisions and whatnot, but common to all of that is humanity, right? I mean, so to me, this is about, being human, right? So to me, it's about, if I would say the billboard probably should say, hey, you are born human, just, relish being human, right? I mean, that's it, so just live life as a human being in its innate glory, right? Which means there are travails that come with it. There are amazing things that come with it. Just experience it. You got like one life to live it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and live life as a human, in both in terms of contributing, learning, developing, growing, having fun, all those different aspects, right? The joys and sorrows of being a human being, right? Everything is part and parcel of it. Sure. So I would say, yeah, I mean, you're born human, relish being one. That's part of the tagline, right? So.
And where would you place it?
It's no question. I would place it somewhere in Africa. I mean, that to me is a birthplace of humanity. So yeah, I would go straight there.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know where in Africa, given I've never been there.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, the dream place that I had to go to is Africa, because that to me is civilization and in humanity, conceptualized there. So that's where I go, right? So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun. Do you have any parting thoughts or
No, this is fun. This is fun. I mean, you made me reach into places that I've actually never even considered in my life, right? So thank you for giving me that opportunity to delve into myself a bit, right? So I had to, think about some of my experiences 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and so on. So, so thank you for that opportunity. I hope your listeners find this useful, or at least interesting. Let's put it that way. So, yeah.
I feel like every one of us have a book to be written inside of us.
Yeah.
And, maybe you can write a book about it, so we'll definitely enjoy
Someday. Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate thank you very much, Prasad. Yeah.
Thank you.